Y'all, remember 5-paragraph essays? Yeah. Do you have like strong feelings about them? Okay, so you're not alone because our next speaker also has some pretty strong feelings about 5-paragraph essays. Her name is Mary Dibinga, and she teaches English at Boston Latin Academy, and I've been told that some of her students are in the audience, which is pretty cool, so shout out to them. So she does have some strong feelings about 5-paragraph essays, but she also has some advice for us on how we might revise the way we teach writing to help our students write stronger essays.
When I talk about being an English teacher, what I love to tell people is how in my job, what I really enjoy is that I get to help students to find their voice and express themselves in writing. Except that in the lived experience of a 10th grade English classroom, that doesn't really feel like what I get to do most of the time. What we really have to work on in 10th grade English is the essay. And it's important work that we do. This is the currency of the academic future that they're going to have in college. Students need to master this form in order to be able to excel. And as Lisa Delpit reminds us, this is particularly important for our most marginalized students. So we know it's important, but we also know that it's a really unnatural form for students. Teachers themselves talk about how esoteric it is. So the way that we get students through this thing is by lots of teacher intervention. We give students a prompt so they know what to write about. And then after that, we give them an outline so that they can organize the ideas. From there, we help them through the revision process with lots of feedback from the teacher. And when I lead students through this, from the prompt, through the outline, through the revisions, by the time I'm done, I feel like I've written the essay. And what's worse is it's not even a good essay. I am leading my students to mediocrity. And it seems like that's just the way it is. So, but I also have another experience of looking at these essays, because every time I have a pile of grading to do, I have a pile of essays that's mostly mediocre, but there's always a few that aren't. There are always a few essays that have an interesting take on the world in the way that they've written about a book, or they have a voice that's really strong. And it seems like, well, maybe these are just the students who really get it, and we get really excited about this. This student really did my assignment well. But if I'm honest with myself, what I really notice about these is these aren't the students who did my assignment well. They're responding to a different task. These are students who found their own interest in exploring an idea that's theirs, not my forms. Had they followed me, they would have ended up with the same mediocre essay. So is it just a couple of outliers who get it? Are these the really brilliant English students? What I really notice about it, though, is that that pile looks kind of the same no matter whether I'm teaching 9th grade remedial classes or AP literature in 12th grade. It's not really about sort of their academic success. In fact, I sometimes find that the more academically successful students are less willing to break out of the mold because they're more conscious of their grade. The way that I find with these students was like, what this was for me was an epiphany that students can do better or do something more. So what if I just demanded it? What if I just said I'm not going to accept mediocrity? So I experimented with it in my classroom, and I thought I was doing really well until in walked Carisha. Literally walked in for a writing conference. Except that I realized pretty quickly that this wasn't so much a conference as a confrontation. She was not happy with the grade that I had given her on her essay. And she wanted an explanation, or really, she wanted me to change the grade. But she wanted first for me to explain it. And she told me very quickly that she had done everything on that rubric, that her essay had all of the components, and I agreed with her that she had responded to the prompt, which was about friendship, by showing me this relationship between two men and of mice and men, and how the men stood up for each other and stayed together and were always together. The perfect 3 examples essay that we typically teach students to write. And I told her that this was pretty good, but that her essay failed to mention that by the end of that book, one of the men kills the other. This tested the limits of her patience, and she just said, well, of course I know that, but it didn't fit her topic, so she didn't bother to mention it. And this was the problem with the task. This was a problem where there wasn't anywhere in the boxes that I was giving her for the thoughts that needed to happen about that book. And there wasn't any place in the prompt that told her that she needed to go beyond that. And Carisha, so I pushed her a little bit on this, and I said, let's try to think about it. But she was very rigid, and she couldn't get out of that type of thinking. And she's not alone in that. Gottschalk and Yorchoy, who are college researchers looking at college writers, noticed the same phenomenon, and they said that we should really think of writing as sort of a substance that you mold and shape, but that is a substance sort of like cement, that after a point sets. And once it's set, trying to get a student to go back in and change that and make revisions takes something on the order of dynamite. And that's what I was doing with Carisha. She was done with her essay, and here I was trying to blow it apart and telling her to start over again. It just seemed patently unfair. And there was nothing in my experience in learning to be a teacher that had taught me how to deal with this. There was no strategy that I had. In fact, the only space that gave me a strategy for this was not my classroom experience, but my work as a debate coach. In debate, I had started off as a volunteer, taking on a debate team for a large urban high school in Boston, bringing students who were really poorly prepared into debates that I didn't actually even understand all of myself. Policy debate is very complicated. I would bring these students to these tournaments and throw them into rounds where they would talk about topics like the efficacy of efficacy of block grants to impact health outcomes, or talk about hegemonic soft power in Asia, teen stuff. And I'd hand them 300-page evidence packets at college level reading, and I'd sit nervously in the background taking notes of things that we should probably work on next practice. And as they talked, my laundry list grew longer and longer and longer to a point where we never would have been able to address all of those things. But I'd watch these students, and in the beginning of the round, they were pretty much a mess, and they were reading arguments that they didn't really understand and couldn't really talk about effectively. But I noticed that as they continued talking, those ideas were changing. And I'd noticed that as the other team asked them questions and they responded, that revised their argument a little bit. And then as they got up to get into that next speech, it had developed a little bit more. And then they thought of something in response to the other thing. And by the end of the round, that same argument they were making was far more developed and was refined into something just much more sophisticated. And then they would walk immediately into the next round of the tournament, tear all those arguments down, and reconstruct them on the opposite side. And I would sit there just completely spellbound as I watched, and that laundry list of things that I had written down, half of them they would have fixed before they finished the tournament without a single word from me. I realized very quickly, debate is a better teacher than I am. And what I realized with that, though, is that what was going on was debate was teaching them to actually understand revision and to see their ideas as something that was moldable and flexible and something that they could enjoy the process of playing with. And that's what gave me the confidence in my conference with Carisha to know that we could get to a different place. So I pushed her off the paper and back into the ideas. And as we talked around to it, she was very resistant at first, sat there tight-lipped and patiently waiting for me to get off of this topic. And every time she would say, well, okay, is that what you want in the box? Well, okay, is that what you want? Okay, is that what you... And I pushed her until finally she sort of broke free of that. And she had this moment where she just had this realization, and she said, well, maybe it's not about what happened in the friendship before the killing. Maybe it had something to do with after. And she came up with this idea suddenly where she said, I think that really in this essay, what's important that it's saying about, in the book, what it's importantly saying about friendship is that without friendship, they couldn't have this dream. And then once the friendship was gone, life wasn't worth living. I was floored. And the other part about it was that she didn't need me anymore after that point. As soon as she had that idea, she was off writing that essay. And she was writing it not to get a page limit, but to get to the power of the idea. She wanted to express it to the fullness that it could be. And it's something from there that I was able to transfer into working with other students. Not in a one-on-one teacher conference way, but in encouraging student-to-student discourse. I worked with other teachers in the Boston Debate League, and we developed strategies that we use in the classroom to have students develop thesis statements, not with heavy teacher intervention, by debating out ideas with each other. By taking a thesis statement, coming up with evidence, then tearing it down and rearranging the evidence and trying out a different way, and learning from each other in discourse communities that didn't just prepare them for what college was, but mimicked exactly what college professors do themselves. Their work was peer-reviewed. And as we worked on this, we as teachers grew too. Now we offer a summer grad class to encourage other teachers to join our work as well. And it's really Carisha that I keep in mind as I'm working on this and as I'm watching in my own instruction growing. And Carisha's words at the end of the year when she was working on her final portfolio for me, she wrote, "I realized that once I sat and thought about my thesis, that my writing could be beautiful." And that's what I carry with me, because now finally in my English instruction, I actually feel like I can honestly say that what I love about being an English teacher is that I get to help students to their beautiful, owned, personal, academic ideas. Thank you.